Joe Biden's housing overhaul. The former vice president planning to institute things like tax credits for new home buyers, a reappraisal of homes, adding money to Section 8 vouchers, and $100 billion towards affordable housing. This could rack up a big tax bill for Americans, accelerating the already growing exodus from high-tax states. Experts predict Biden's plan may result in marginal tax rates of more than 60% in places like New Jersey, California, Hawaii, and New York City. Taken all together, the numbers are even higher than that, actually. Joining me right now is Peebles Corporation founder, chairman, and CEO, Don Peebles. Don, it's great to have you this morning. Thanks very much for joining us. What would be, in your view, real impactful in terms of policy coming out of this potential new administration that would impact real estate?
I think tax policy incentivizing new construction, new development for rent properties, and also subsidies that would encourage developers to expand the number of units that they provide for workforce housing, which I think is our biggest challenge in terms of urban cities around the country.
Yeah, I mean, we talked about tax policy a lot on this program with you, and as a result of high taxes in New York, we're seeing an exodus out of New York, going to places like no-income tax places like Florida and Texas. Tell me what you're seeing and what you're expecting for the rest of the year. Does the election that we saw change anything? Because last time we spoke, you said, you know, brick and mortar real estate is dead. You're not going to see the kind of business that was prevalent before COVID.
Yeah, what I was saying is brick and mortar retail is dead. Large, big box brick and mortar retail is dead because of online shopping, and consumer consumption patterns have changed forever. I think what we're going to see in terms of, I don't think this election has slowed the exodus down out of a New York City, for example, or other tax cities and states around the country. If anything, I think it's going to accelerate it a bit because everyone knows that there will be a discussion about tax increases. And the irony of Trump's tax reform was that it resulted in most high-income earners an increase because of the elimination of state and local income taxes. And so the idea of rolling that back is not overly productive. But I believe that the diminishing quality of life in New York City, for example, the high cost of doing business, the high cost of living in New York City, I think those things will continue to push people to places like Florida, where they get the inverse of that. They get a good quality of life, they get lower taxes, in fact, no state income taxes, and they get a lower cost of doing business, which will attract entrepreneurs. And New York City, regardless of who is president, needs to fundamentally change. The government needs to understand that it is to provide basic necessities and a safety net for those most vulnerable, but it cannot be everything to everybody, nor can the federal government. And I believe that if this new administration comes in and tries to do that, it will not be sufficient, by the way, because there's not enough money. And what will happen is it'll drive taxes up and stifle business.
Well, it's a really important point that you're making. What kind of practical things are you referring to in terms of giving stuff away, in terms of money for everybody? Because, you know, there are ideologies out there. Yeah.
Well, look, I think, for example, you know, President-elect Biden's incentive for home ownership is a nice gesture, but it's $15,000, and the average cost of a home in the United States is $350,000. So it's some money, but it's really not going to help people who really can't afford down payments. It's going to help people who can afford it and maybe encourage them a little bit more. But I think that the solution has to come from the private sector. And one of the ways to do it is to use tax policy and also land use policies in these cities to reduce the cost of housing so that it becomes more affordable. And that's a private sector solution. Or let's get more people working so that they have higher incomes and we have more people who are capable of buying. I think those are the things. But for example, workforce has left these major cities a long time ago because of affordability and the poor performing public school systems. And so it's a lot more complicated than just throwing a relatively small amount towards individuals and burdening the entire country with these additional costs. There are some other solutions, though, that the president-elect and these mayors and governors around the country in these high-cost states can do.
What can you tell us about Manhattan rental opportunities right now? We've got some data here. According to the Wall Street Journal, there were 16,000 available New York apartments in September. Median rents were down 11% on. Many New Yorkers have seized on this soft market as an opportunity to upgrade. What are you seeing in terms of rental?
Real estate's a pretty straightforward business. It's a supply and demand business, and demand continues to decline in New York City, especially at the upper income and the upscaling types of apartments. And as a result, rents are going down. They're going to keep going down because demand, there's no impetus to increase demand. In fact, again, we talked about this just a few minutes ago, is that there's a discouragement of demand. And so it's pushing people out of the city, which also reduces demand. So I see rents dropping on apartments. I see rents continuing to drop on office space. I don't see any real bids on retail space. And I think luxury condos are in deep, deep trouble in New York City because their consumers have left the city. Many of them have, and many have left for good. I mean, I was talking to people in my industry, and many of the people who are optimistic, obviously, are the ones who are already vested in it. But if you talk to the people who finance real estate, they're extremely cautious right now about New York City.
Why, Don? What's the biggest issue? Other than taxes?
Biggest issue, Maria, biggest issue is demand and how people will work in the future. Most people do not believe that the major industries such as financial services are going to be able to compel the majority of their workers to come back to work at their desk in their office every day of the week, 5 days of the week. Literally, uniformly, people believe that there will be a significant amount of remote working.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And then you add on to it the looting and the, just terrible obstruction of property, taking down statues, and you add the safety issue on there. People are afraid for their families in terms of safety. That's got to be part of it too, right?
Absolutely it is. I mean, if you look at the exoduses out of cities, they tend to be driven initially by public safety. And then there are economic conditions that come with that. But normally it's public safety.
Don, it's great to see you this morning as always. Thanks so much, sir. Of course, we'll be watching. Don Peebles joining us.